Hi, I'm Paul Guppy with the Washington Policy Center, and this is our regular update on the issues that are going to be affecting everyone across the state, policy changes that the legislature has enacted and that are actually now going into effect. As always, please like, share, and subscribe to our videos. Again, as I've mentioned before, we have a growing audience, which is exciting, and we love to communicate directly with people without having to go through the traditional media filter. And so what I'm going to do is hit 5 issues today regarding new taxes that are coming this summer, and then a couple of items in the media that I just can't resist responding to. So we'll get to those in a second. First up is gas prices. So there are always reports from AAA about what gas prices are doing as we go into vacation and summer driving season. But we know one factor that is definitely going to increase the price of gas starting on July 1st, and that is a 6-cent a gallon increase in the gas tax in Washington state that goes into effect on that date, July 1st. So on June 30th, you might want to get out there and fill your gas tank before prices take a big jump. What that's going to do is push our state gas tax to just slightly less than 56 cents a gallon. That makes us the 3rd highest gas tax in the country, right after California and Hawaii. And I was recently traveling on the East Coast and visiting friends in Virginia, and I was shocked to drive past a gas station where they had gas at $2.95 a gallon. And it just showed to me, like, there is a better world out there. You don't have to live with the high prices in Washington state. And it shows why there are population movements where just one indicator as to why people are moving to other states as a broader trend. So it would be nice if we were able to lock in some of those lower prices here. Again, a lot of it is driven by our gas tax. I did some quick research about what gas taxes are in other states. Turns out that there are 7 states which have a gas tax of less than 20 cents a gallon, and yet the examples are Arizona, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Hawaii, Mississippi. They all have gas taxes that are lower than ours, significantly less than half, and yet those states have good roads. So somehow they're able to do it with the revenue that they receive from a lower gas tax. Another factor that I looked up was, what is our refinery capacity in this state? Because we have oil refineries here. So we produce gasoline right inside our state, and we have the 5th highest refinery capacity in the country. So you would think that gasoline would be relatively cheap here. We get Alaska crude, is shipped directly to our state, refined, and then goes right out into the market. And yet, for some reason, our gas prices are much higher than in other places. So those are market factors that if our policy elected officials in the legislature, the Democrats, if they were a little less avaricious for money, we would actually have lower prices at the pump. That would be good for our economy, good for our families. The next issue is a similar policy change. There is also a sales tax increase coming, but not in the sales tax rate, because that's what people would notice. So there are 2 ways to raise taxes. One is to increase the tax rate, which tends to get a lot of attention. But the second way, more cleverly, is public officials know that if they expand the base to which a tax applies, they will get more money, and the public will generally not notice. That is exactly what's going to happen, again, coming up on July 1st. That the state sales tax will be expanded to a whole range of services that it hadn't applied to before. We tend to think of the sales tax as being a consumer tax on goods. That's true, but it also applies to services. So the legislature expanded it to things like IT training, help desk services, website development, software development, security monitoring, armored car services, hiring temporary staff, digital ads, but not print ads, only online, and even things like public speaking at lectures, seminars, workshops. So you can see there's a whole range of economic activity which had not paid the sales tax in the past, and now that 6.5% sales tax is going to be slapped on those services. It will bring in hundreds and hundreds of millions of additional dollars to the state, but it will also have, of course, a depressing effect on economic activity in our state. And this is all driven, as I've mentioned before, and the numbers show this, it's just driven by greed in the public sector. The state has plenty of money. We've had raising revenues. The Democrats, as I mentioned before, enacted a whole raft of new taxes. And so tax policy really seems to be driven by the need, the political need, to feed the vast web of interests that benefit from public spending. And Rather than objective budget measures, we think that that political motivation is the reason that we pay so much in taxes in our state. Next is a media item I just have to respond to. So a few days ago, the Seattle Times, again with great fanfare, had a story about Washington households can't afford the basics, about affordability, the cost of just paying for daily life, and yet nowhere through the entire article is there any comment about the cost that government officials impose on the public. Between 30 and 40, 45% of our income goes to taxes at the federal, state, and local level. This article had no mention of that. So when there are man-made decisions, when public officials are deciding how much of our money to take, it seems that there should be an objective measure to say, well, that contributes to the affordability crisis, as the Seattle Times calls it. We think that one of the factors that should be accounted for economically regarding how to just get by in our state, how much it costs to live here, is to take into account how much the government takes immediately and lowers take-home pay. Conversely, we support at Washington Policy Center, the reason we support lowering the financial burden that government places on us is a tax burden reduction automatically and directly increases take-home pay for everybody in the state. And that would have a tremendous stimulus effect. We also think it would be more ethical to not take as much money that people earn, and there's a moral dimension to the way the budget is put together as well. Next item is, I got an update from our transportation expert, Charles Prestrud, who has been tracking ferry services very closely. The state just announced recently with great excitement and fanfare that they have rebuilt the ferry fleet back up to 21 boats in service, which is what they're supposed to have. This is pre-COVID levels of service, and they're all excited because after 5 years, they finally achieved this. And yet, when you look at the details, the ferry boat Wenatchee is coming online next week after having a conversion to electric service. The way they put it, it's the reason I'm hesitating is that, as Charles described to me, they didn't actually install the charging stations at the Seattle dock. So when the ferry is there, it uses onboard diesel engines in order to charge the battery so it can be a, quote, carbon-free electric boat. And so that's why that technology is so expensive. It doesn't work very well. They're also excited that they put 2 ferry boats back on the Seattle to Bremerton service, which to me would be standard, but they've only had 1 boat for the last couple of years. And again, Charles pointed out to me an interesting historical fact that in the 1940s, there were 5 ferries servicing the run between Seattle and Bremerton. So we tend to think that, well, in the modern world, we're always progressing, things are getting better, right? And it's surprising to me when I look at some historical fact where they actually had better service in the past than they do now. We should be able to equal what was built in the past. So as I mentioned, there are 21 boats in the fleet. That makes 18 that are in service. Officials, again, with great fanfare, said that, oh, we're all set for the summer travel season, but there's no room for margin or contingency. So I would expect that once again, there will be delays, cancellations, hours of waiting at the ferry dock coming this summer, just because they have not been able to build the capacity that we need. This dates from a 2018 executive order that Jay Inslee put in order to require new ferries to be electric driven, and we're living with the legacy of that. Another thing to put this in context is that we are not expecting a new ferry to be in service in Washington State until 2029. The original plan from pre-COVID was that the state needed at least 8 new boats by 2029. We'll be lucky to get 1 new boat by then. So this public service, which is a government monopoly, we think will continue to degrade, and there will be fantastic cover stories about how service is improving, it's getting better. But when you look at the larger context, that money is not really being spent effectively. And then the last issue I'll touch on, again, responding to something in the media, is our newly elected Attorney General, Nick Brown, was doing an interview with the Stranger newspaper in Seattle and talking about the immigration issue. And Washington Policy Center doesn't really get involved in that larger international issue about immigration and demonstrations. We are all in favor of peaceful protests, peaceful messaging. But what Nick Brown did was he called people who disagreed with him on this issue fascists. And we just think that kind of name calling, which we have been experiencing across the country and in Washington State over the last several years, is really harmful and divisive in our communities. We are trying to support respectful civic engagement so people can share their thoughts and ideas in an honest way without being called names. And to hear the top law enforcement official in the state use these kinds of labels against his opponents, we think just discourages the kind of democratic, open discussion and dialogue that we need in our state. Democracy is only possible when we are able to talk with each other and disagree without being disagreeable. Always engage in civic exchange of ideas. That's what Washington Policy Center is always encouraging. And it just makes it a harder policy, public debate environment in our state when the top leaders are setting a tone that is so negative. So we'll continue to try to take a positive approach to this, and we really hope that we're joined by other state officials who will, again, invite open, respectful dialogue and not engage in that kind of negative name calling. So with that, I'll wrap up, and I'll be back in the future with another update. Thank you.
If you found this informative, share it with a friend and consider checking out one of our suggested videos over here. Make sure you're subscribed so that you can stay up to date with the latest policy news from Washington.